So I was 21 years old when I first entered the classroom, and I'm almost 31, almost a whole decade, and I'd like to share my teaching story. Hey there, my name is Yale Bass. I'm a former Spanish teacher of 5 years, and I went through the Teach for America program. I taught in Los Angeles and in Las Vegas. So I want to start off with the very beginning. So when I was in high school, I actually did not want to be a teacher. It never crossed my mind. I had two things in mind, and it was to be a lawyer or to be a marine biologist. And I was more passionate about the marine biology, but for whatever reason, I just chose international business and Spanish at my alma mater. It was a small private university in the LA area. And so when I was in college, I enjoyed what I studied, and I studied abroad and polished my Spanish, and I was very passionate about the world in general and language. And it wasn't until one of my bosses, I used to work at the career services at my university. I spent, I think, 3 years in that place. And one of my supervisors, bosses, she actually worked with City Year a while back. And so she recommended the program, and I decided to do a City Year. And I have a video on this in my experience with City Year, so you can learn more about that. And it was more of like a gap year type of thing rather than let's start applying for jobs after graduation. And maybe it was more of a fearful thing, but I felt like I was kind of catching up on life that last semester of college because I studied abroad my first semester. And so there were a lot of changes. I had ended a relationship a year earlier, and so there were a lot of changes in that on that last year as a college student. And as you're going through it, you're just like, I don't know, the time is close, I need to get a job or whatever. And so I kind of felt that pressure, and I had this connection to City Year, and I had somebody who could recommend me to the program, who worked for the program, and I thought that was just a blessing. Anyways, I did the City Year thing in San Jose, California. And although it was very challenging, I think it really paved the foundation to my teaching journey, especially getting involved heavily, just like in the gritty details of teaching. Even though you don't take on a teaching position, but you do have like an after-school role where you're in charge of a group of students. And every after school classroom has 2 people in it, and the person that I worked with, she actually resigned from City Year, and so I had experience running an after school program by myself, basically a classroom. And it was highly difficult because there were students in that class that they just had a lot of issues, and I didn't know how to deal with a lot of these things. And and there were other things to add, other personal things that made working challenging. And so anyways, it really paved the way, at least, to develop this characteristic of resilience, which is highly necessary in the workplace as a teacher. And so from City Year, the time was coming up, and I needed to figure out what I needed to do with my life, essentially. And I remember applying to this internship it was like a politic internship or something. And then I had Teach for America. And so I was at this point where I was like, well, I'm gonna just be able to base my decision of where I want to go based off of the acceptance, right? And both programs, I would say, were difficult to get into. There's a rumor, I don't know if it's true, you can fact check this, but there's a rumor that says that the acceptance rate to Teach for America back in 2016, 2017 is like is similar to the acceptance rate at Harvard. And so, however, I did have an advantage because I had that city year connection. I was able to enter it. They say that applicants that have city year experience are 3 times more likely to get into the Teach for America program. So I already had an advantage, and you know, I don't know what was going through my head. I guess I didn't really do a lot of research on teaching, but I just wanted to take on the challenge because I saw how challenging it was at my city year school site, and I like the challenge. I don't want an easy job. I want something that, you know, will make me work hard. And teaching is definitely one of those jobs. You will never be bored. Every single day will be different. And you will be putting out fires. So you'll be a firefighter. And so that was my, that's a stage I was in between City Year and Teach for America. And I remember saying that if I get into Teach for America, like I had specific conditions because I also don't want to go into it and be like, you know, like this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But I had certain conditions for it. And it was, I had to teach Spanish, and they had to give me the location and the exact level that I wanted to teach, which was high school. And I got all 3 of those conditions met. And it was just such a blessing because it was just like the perfect avenue. And so there was no other way for me to, there was no other option for me other than saying yes to this acceptance rate. And I will be very honest, I did not do a lot of research on Teach for America. I did some research, and I had most of the positive perspective of Teach for America came from actual people that would talk to me. In fact, Teach for America came to City Year, to our school site, well, not my specific school site, but like in the area, and they spoke to City Year people. And you know, it's very interesting because there were people in my cohort that actually did not get into Teach for America. And it's just interesting because you should be like, it's very likely that you will, but there were people that did not. So there's but anyways, I do have videos on how I got accepted and, you know, just tips and tricks and stuff on the interview. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave the links here or on the description. So that was that. And so I accepted the letter, or I accepted the offer. And there were a lot of things that I had to do before but eventually, I don't want to get into the details of it because this was in 2017. It's nothing recent. I'm sure that things are going to change, or things are changing now in Teach for America. And if so, let me know in the comments. I'd like to know what those changes are. And essentially, the summer of 2017, so in Teach for America, you have this summer program where you go and you basically get your teaching experience, even though it's just less than a month. And basically I co-taught with somebody else who's a dear friend of mine still, and she and I basically taught English. And so I was going to teach English with her, which is funny because my original subject was Spanish. So I don't have any experience at this point teaching Spanish. I did study Spanish. I did study abroad, but I never taught it, right? And so here I am teaching English, and thankfully I had a great group of students. This was in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, and I never had a single issue with any of these kids. And you know, I forget the name of the high school, but basically that was the experience that I had. And then going into my Teach for America experience now, so if you're not familiar with TFA, it's a 2-year teaching experience. It's basically an effort to recruit and retain teachers. And looking back, Teach for America is very interesting. And, when I was part of it, and going back to the preparation part, I don't really think they know how to prepare teachers truly. And I don't have any proposals about how to change it. That's not like the point of this video. I'm just sharing my story. But some of the things that were kind of weird to me, now looking back, was there were a lot of conversations about white privilege. They had us do this thing where we basically, and we don't know these people, right? Just a bunch of young, recent college graduates. They're all were accepted in Teach for America from all different parts of the country. And it's really cool. You meet all sorts of people. However, there was this part where they basically segregate you based off of your race. I mean, they don't, but you do, right? They're like, if you identify with Hispanic, or if you identify as Black, if you identify as white, go in this room. And in that room, you are to share some of the challenges that come from being Hispanic or things that come from being white. It's just this rhetoric of your race. And I don't know what that has to do with teaching, but I was really young. I was 21 and I just went with it, right? And I didn't really understand what was going on. And now looking back, it's like, why did we spend so much time talking about race theory and critical? I don't know. I don't know why that's even important in the classroom, because I never used it. So that was just a weird thing. But anyways, it was like, I brushed it off and I didn't care for it as much. And I just go into my first year as a Spanish teacher, and you can learn more about, the mental health, it was really hard the first 2 years. I'm not gonna lie. I was in a good school site, I would say, but it had its challenges. And especially when it came to administration, there were certain people that I was not fond of, and it was really hard to work with these folks. But I did have a great department. I grew so much as a teacher. But there are things that you go into the classroom and you don't really. So the way that I look at it is that every teacher has a toolbox. When you're a first year teacher, no experience in teaching, you're maybe Teach for America, you come in with a toolbox with 0 or maybe 1 or 2 tools. But when you have experience in the teaching world, when you have experience with students, when you have experience working with children and managing them and learning how to handle their emotions and things like that, classroom management, stress management, then your toolbox is very full, and you know what to do, and you take them out automatically. It's you automate the use of these tools. Whereas when you're a first year teacher with little experience or 0 experience, you're basically learning with no tools. You have no tools on you, and you're like, what do I do? And that's why a lot of teachers experience failure and constant failure. And if you know a first year teacher, please give them a smile, help them out, because they are struggling, even though they may not look it, right? But they are definitely struggling, especially if they have very little experience, or if they're Teach for America, or perhaps they studied a different major than what they are teaching. So that's something to consider. And I don't want to get too in the specifics of it, but I spent my 2 years in Teach for America LA, and the commute was brutal. There was just more challenges than good. And I think the only good would have to be my coach. And I don't know if she watches any of my videos, but she was just amazing, and very gentle with me, especially because, I thought I knew Spanish, but man, once you get into the curriculum of it and what you need to teach students, I felt like my Spanish was so limited compared to what I was supposed to teach the students, right? But anyways, I learned so much, and even my Spanish improved within those 2 years. And I had students correcting me for certain things. And I remember struggling a lot with el subjuntivo. And, you know, it's just awesome now that I'm, you know, 10 years later, like not only has my teaching improved, but also my own like Spanish has improved. And and this is coming from a native Spanish speaker, right? Imagine if you're a non-native Spanish speaker teaching Spanish, that's another layer of challenge, I believe. But anyways, that was just like the positive of that. You know, I try to keep it balanced here. So then from Teach for America, I took a break. Essentially, I left the teaching world. I left that school site, and I didn't know what to do with my life at that point. My family had a coffee business at that point, and they were encouraging me to stay and to help the business and just live off of the business, essentially. And because we all lived together anyways. So I did that for a couple months, and then I decided to move to Las Vegas with an ex-boyfriend. And basically I went to Las Vegas, I'm still young at this point, younger than 25. And so basically I decided to go to Las Vegas with zero job, even though I had a bachelor's degree and I had teaching experience. I didn't even try to like look for teaching jobs at this point because again, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. And he gets a teaching job, and that's what we live off. And then I get a job as a barista at a Starbucks at the community college in Las Vegas. And I did that for a few months maybe. And then I got a job as a TA at the school where my ex worked at. And so it was pretty cool because, well, one, it was really hard, that barista job, because, well, actually, like, I kind of liked it because of the fast pace of it, but, you know, at those type of jobs, like minimum wage jobs, well, it wasn't a minimum wage job, but at those type of, like, you know, food industry and the coffee and all that stuff, like, I feel like managers just treat you like crap. Like, companies just, even fast food restaurants, like, people just do not care about you, essentially. And so it was a really humbling type of job. I was getting paid $18 an hour or $16 an hour, and I thought that was pretty good for just making coffee, and it was a good temp job, and I made some friends from there. And anyways, I got the TA job. I go get it. And again, with the intent of just having a job for now and not going into the classroom. And so I go in, and it's a whole different culture than my first school site. Like, the kids are happier, the teachers are happier, they're connecting, and there's just more connection between each other, families, and it's just very good-spirited people. And so I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. This is so brand new to me. It's like, you know, light versus dark, you know what I mean? Not that there was no light in my first school site, but it was just intense, you know, and they're very well known. They're part of a huge charter network, and they have high test scores, and the kids are really smart, but they're just not happy. And the teachers are paid really well at that school too. And I think that's what keeps them there, is the money. I don't know about like the actual like enjoying, but there is no joy in the other school site. But in this school site, it was different for at that point, right? Because I felt like joy was being stripped off, like at the very end tail of my career there. But anyways, let's just be positive right now at this point. And so my third year, actually no, I was going back to the TA position. And here, as a TA, I was pushing in for students that had special needs or they needed an interpreter. So I was just going in there and helping them one-on-one or in a group or whatever, you know. And this was very interesting to me because I was able to look at how different teachers taught in different subject areas. English, science, chemistry, history, like all the subjects I was pushing in, and I learned so much. I learned about like, wow, that's like a really great teacher. Wow, that guy needs a lot of help. You know, and even though that wasn't my intent to like judge or evaluate people, but because I had this teaching experience already, like I was able to look at what was attractive in the classroom and what helps students versus what does not help students, because I also had an advantage over being amongst other students that were around me, and they would also communicate, oh yeah, I understand this, or I don't understand this. So it was advantageous for sure to be a TA, even though I had teaching experience. And it was a pay cut, you guys. It was like $18 an hour. And I will tell you this, that it was not a challenging job. It was super easy. And at least for somebody who had teaching experience, it was a breeze for me, and it was boring at times. And I was like, I really like, you know, a few months into there, I did have the idea of maybe I should be a teacher. And I think I had some folks that had mentioned that, oh, maybe you should because you have teaching experience. But I was like, I don't know if I really want to. And then this was during COVID now, I think. And so my third year, I taught, but over the computer. And I did end up getting the job. I did apply to become a Spanish teacher at that school site, and I got, I got accepted, and it was wonderful. It was great. It wasn't stressful at all. But then COVID hit, and it was a whole different environment, I guess. And I think that's what really impacted maybe the culture of the school. The third year, it was just over the computer. I barely knew who my students were, or I didn't really know who they were. And then it comes the fourth year, which is the year after COVID, right? And it was just an awkward teaching year because you have kids that are just, most of the kids are like quiet, and there's just no joy. You just don't really see the joy in it, right? And then my fifth year as a teacher, I remember that it was the best year for me, but it was also one of the most challenging years for me. I felt kids were more comfortable, and I felt like it wasn't a COVID thing anymore, you know, they were more sociable, and it was kind of back to normal, right? However, there was just a new group of students, and the culture had shifted in a way. A lot of the policies were changing, more regulations, and I understand why you have to have more strict policies, because, you know, there were more behavioral problems. You know, you have dress code now and just a bunch of rules, essentially, and they were constantly changing. And I mentioned this in my Why I Quit video. There's so many reasons, but that was one of the ones that just frustrated me the most, is that the rules were constantly changing, and people were just not enforcing them. You know, some teachers would and some teachers wouldn't, and then, you know, if you enforce it, you just, you know, anyways. Going back to the main point, my fifth year, I felt very comfortable in the classroom, and I felt like my skills were being enhanced, they were being refined. I actually had a class that was the worst class that I've ever had in my whole 5 years, and it turned out to be the best class, my favorite one actually. And yeah, I have a video on that. It's just amazing, like the growth that you can see with your students, with yourself. And anyways, yeah, I do believe that there was a shift in the culture, and I think that was one of the reasons why I left, because there was just a lot of different pieces moving all the time. And sorry, I'm looking at the time there. And then I decided, and then I got married in January of 2023. Hold on. When did I get married? Yeah, 2023, I got married. Oh gosh, I should know this. 2023, I got married, and that was the same year that I resigned, and I moved into his apartment. I used to have a house, and I still, well, at that point, I still had my house. My brother was living there, and I moved into his apartment, and it was farther away from the school site, because the house was like 15 minutes from the workplace. And so I was commuting a lot. Like, it was like a 30 up to a 40, 50-minute commute, and it was just, I was not a fan of it. And so that was one of the issues. I'm like, maybe I should apply to a school closer to his apartment, and which I did apply, but I didn't end up getting it for whatever reason. And I did apply to other jobs, and I wouldn't get an interview or anything like that. And I also didn't look that much. Like, just applying for a new job was just, it was really hard. It was tough. And so I was getting paid up to August, and then the school year ends in June. And so I have a couple of months, I'm still getting paid, and I get pregnant at the end of July. And so we're trying to figure out, like, what should we do? Well, actually, there were two things that happened. The first thing is I didn't have a job, and so we were preparing for things, and maybe we should move into your house, into my house. And so that's what we did, and we cut the lease at my husband's apartment to save money so that we're not paying the mortgage and also paying for his apartment. So we do that. And then I get pregnant, and so I'm still in the process of looking for a job. But then we just came to this decision that because the mortgage is ridiculous cheap, compared to other homes, because I actually got a good deal on that home, a great interest rate. And so we're like, I think we're able to survive on one income. And even though it had some, we did have some sacrifices to make. I had to sell my car, and it's just different, you travel less and things like that. So, and that's completely okay. And so I didn't go back to the classroom, and I stayed home, and I did an Airbnb business for a couple of months, and then, we had to stop doing that because the baby was going to be born. And so I just became a stay-at-home mom since then. And it has been a great thing. And at this point, while I'm pregnant, I'm also working on my TPT business, and I was pretty consistent for the most part. However, the time between, giving birth and actually, postpartum and stuff like that, I just stopped completely for a few months, and then I started back again, not too long ago, maybe like 5 months ago or something. I don't remember, but that's something that I'm working on right now, and I am so glad that I have this TPT business, and I also enjoy making videos about it. And I don't make money off of YouTube, by the way, but that would be just another blessing. I am lacking in watch time, so if you have any advice, or if you just want to support the channel, go ahead and watch all the other videos. If they are practical to you, if they are beneficial to you, please go ahead and watch them. I would appreciate it very much. And I do have the subscriber count, and anyways, yeah, this is great that I'm able to do this. Will I ever go back to the classroom? I don't know. But I will tell you this, that I enjoy making TPT content. I enjoy making YouTube content and giving you the some insight, and sometimes I feel like I can't provide a lot of insight because I'm not in the classroom, but I try my best, and I hope to just be another resource for you all as you are going through your teaching journey. If you're a first year or limited experience teacher, I think there's a lot that you can learn through this channel. And so yeah, let me know where you're at in your journey. Share your teaching story down below, or make your own video and share it with me, and I'd love to hear and connect with you if you're a teacher or if you're a former teacher. Let's just go ahead and support one another. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you soon. Bye.